I think there's a fluid talk and a fluid conversation that you can have about race and in the gospel. And most of the time, there's people who have experienced extreme suffering from racism, that they can have a fluid conversation with the gospel because they've been transformed. And I think that's the issue is like when we start talking about race in America, most people don't look at it as something that we need to be transformed from. It's something that just automatically happens. We're censored to the idea of race, and that we don't want to own up to anything in the past, present, or future of that. But if we want to dial it down to just sin, then it is a sin of omission, because it's a sin that you're allowing to happen without dealing with. And God talks about that very clearly, that there's sins of commission and there's sins of omission. So if we want to say that, then that's another conversation that you really don't want to enter, because you're like, oh man, now I got to start looking at examining my heart. Now I got to start examining the things that I'm actually doing, and examine how I treat people, talk to people, my wife, my family, all these type of things that are happening. And then as we look around us, our world is turning upside down, not because of political nature, but because of race. And it has nothing to do with somebody being conservative or liberal. Families are changing and they're becoming browner, and the world is becoming browner, whether people want to believe it or not. And so it's a self-preserve. Like we do that all the time. Like if you're a married couple and your wife spends or your husband spends, what do? You put money aside. So you can self-preserve. So you know that you can be taken care of. And so race is the same way. It's a human nature. We self-preserve all the time. And to think that we are not self-preserving when it comes to race, like is just, I think, asinine in any kind of thought. Like if I see an African-American male getting beat up, I'm not going to rush to save the white kid. I'm going to rush to save the African-American male, because it's about self-preservation. And it's not about whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not, whether it makes sense or not, but it's about self-preservation. That's the human nature. And that's a language of the fall that we're seeing that is coming clearly through our society right now.
Do you feel like, I feel like what I'm seeing a huge push, and I mean, I think it's political, but I think it's also, that human nature piece, I feel like is being fed by the idea of like otherness, right? Like the scapegoating that I feel like is happening in our systems, where like there's such an us against them, and it's not even just race. It's like, even down to like which news show you watch, right? Like it's us against them. And like, it's so like polarized right now, but it seems like race and nationality and all of those things they have become, they've always been, right? They've always been part of the issue. And like, it's like now it's like you can't even, places where it seems like we used to agree, like we don't anymore. Yeah. And the first thing, I guess, this is the first time with this particular murder that it seems like people have finally like crossed the political barrier and gone, dude, that's not right. Like that's not okay. And it seems to me like it probably has to do with the fact that there's not a police officer involved this time. And
well, there was. He was just retired.
Right, but like that. Well, yeah. I think that you got like white people that are not seeing it that way. As far as like, this wasn't a police necessarily like official issue. You have, and I think that you're seeing, especially in, I think that white people they make these things events instead of systems. They make these things like, this happened and I'm not okay with like that this particular thing happened, and I'm upset with those particular white people that happened to do that thing, and I'm willing to say that those white people were wrong. And I think like one of the values of just like what you have really been able to teach me in times that we've talked is how it's not that. Like, it isn't. I love what you were saying about the idea of omission versus commission, right? Like, we believe if I'm not racist, if I'm not out shooting people, if I'm not using racial slurs, if I'm kind to whoever is of another color than me, like, I should be good. And I would love for you to maybe expand a little bit on that and like help us understand that.
Yeah, one, I mean, just as a gospel minister, I'm not good. And so for me to come to like this realization or this kind of thought process that there are good people and then there are bad people, like separating people. First, that's the wrong way to think about this, because good people do wrong and bad people do right. So is there going to be a time where we can both see them doing the right thing at the right time? Yeah. I mean, you can, a drug dealer can serve a turkey to a homeless family just like a church can. I mean, there's, because he's doing good, does that make him right? And we're not even talking about his color. So, he's poisoning the community. He's doing it to create influence. Just like the church is doing it to create influence and to rid the community of poison. So they're working actually against each other, but doing the same good thing. And so when we start to think about somebody's good, even Jesus said, he's not even good. The only person that's good is God. And when we dial down people to a certain moral value that they actually cannot attain, then we have separate society in that construct. Like saying somebody is good has really defamed the name of God. Because now what you're saying is this person is better than God. And right now he can do whatever he likes. And he has like a free will and free choice to make decisions without saying God is good. We say God is good all the time. Like, we use these euphemisms. But if we say, oh, he's such a good person. Oh, he was a good friend to me. Like, no, actually he wasn't a good friend to you. And actually, because he did this atrocious thing, he is not a good person. The only person that is good is God. And we hold people to these moral values in such a bad way. And I think that's one of the things that I think people struggle with all the time. Is like when they see somebody get murdered, like Justine Diamond, she was here in Minneapolis, and an Ethiopian cop shot her. And it was like, oh, she was such a good person. We don't know that. We don't know that she was such a good person. What was she doing there? We don't know the story. But all we know is that she was a white woman that got shot by a brown person. And so now she deserved justice more than anybody else in that. And I think that's where the divide comes. It's like we look at people on the basis of their skin color as they're good. And America has had a huge problem in understanding that they're not good. They have a huge issue. The church, our cities, our governments, we know we've never had a good president. I don't even know why people would even say that that's even possible. We've never had a good president. We've never had a good president. We've always had somebody that would lean to our issues or go to our influence, but there's no such thing as a good president. And I think one of the things where I really learned this concept was in the Bible, in the New Testament, in Luke 15, Jesus calls this Samaritan good. And like everywhere in culture, there was nothing good about Samaritans. Like he actually showed you like the cultural position of everyone around him. They like avoided him at all costs. It didn't matter what side of the street he walked on or what was going on. They were like, this Samaritan. And Jesus called him good. And he called him good because good was asinine to what the community thought about him. And then we use these terms as, oh, that's my good black friend, Carl.
He's a good.
How do you
and why are you still that friend?
Yeah, and so right, and so, but that's what we're like.
She laughing at what I just said.
Yeah, she is, Melanie. Yeah, that's my. You want to come in on this conversation?
Yeah, unplug it. Come on.
I love me some Mel.
Yeah, Melanie was saying.
Oh, you come school us on race here. I want to hear all your thoughts.
we start using these terms in our communities and
Carl he real spiritual.
Yeah, but when we
I'm gonna tell you, these white people crazy.
that is another thing, but she's recording now. Yeah, so
she don't care.
but what we need to really understand is that the terms that we use to describe people are not correct.
Right.
They're very fallible in what it means to what people can do and how people can treat others. It's very fallible. Like we know that if, like I watch TikTok all the time and I see like a black guy asking a white girl, if can I bring you home? They're like, no. No, I can't come home. No, I would never bring you to my house because they know their parents would not accept it. You know, we're very fallible in the ways that we accept other colors and other people because we've been taught to be that way. Now there needs to learn it.
And I mean, when these events, these murders happen, right? Like it tends to fall. We have mercy and compassion for the one that looks like us, right? Like when the police end up shooting someone, it's, well, they were scared and I would have been scared in that space. So then it's okay. And for white people, there is a real lack of understanding of what it's like to be a person of color and what it's like to live in the level of policing that you have. And I think that one of the things that really, I think like when we're talking like toe in the water, like first time that people are really catching on to the idea that there's a totally different system for people of color than there are for white people. And like, I think that white people like to come into a conversation and go, well, if you had just this, and then they like to apply, like we like to apply our reality into your reality. And I think that one of the ways that you guys have been just so incredibly generous, and so many of my friends have been so generous just to tell their stories of like, this is where you do not live where I live. And it's not because we don't live on the same street. It's because your country and my country are totally different in a justice sort of way. And so I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that stuff. Like Mel, the way that I was trying to get, or what we're trying to do here is just kind of teach white people to listen instead of talking to them about what. I think a lot of times on Facebook, like a person of color will share a part of their life or they'll share their perspective. And the first thing that white people do is jump on and go, that's not right. Or they jump on with like a preconceived idea, or they ask a question that's not intended to be a question. It's intended to be a conversation stopper. And, so I guess this whole thing is kind of to help us learn to listen, because I think that there's a lot of things that I don't know and that you guys can teach me, you know, and I think also for the other people around. So, out of that I just said, what do you guys think? Like, what would you love people to hear and understand?
Well, I'm going to say from the inception of slavery, Black people had to raise and think differently about their family structures in all capacities.
Yeah.
In every single one. Even the demeaning of the Black woman down to the demasculation of the Black man. And that is something that is a major thing that people just assume that we just do because we don't want to pull our bootstraps up. They just assume that this is what should supposed to happen. We should be able to pull ourselves out of the mire and muck because of the things that have happened. But we have trauma, we have barriers, we have constructs that are in our way. Black men are basically invisible until they act out. Nobody sees them. Black women have to think about supporting a Black man who is invisible, who is angry, who's trying to move forward, and they have to deal with the trauma that ensues around that. And so most of the time that trauma comes out as violence, as domestic violence. And so that stuff comes out not equally. And so we are living in a time where people have no idea about the ramifications of what slavery is. Because it's over, that doesn't mean it's stopped.
Right.
Like, because it's over doesn't mean like we don't have any trauma and we don't have any issues, we don't have any family. Like, slavery is only 2 generations from me.
Right.
So, so let's be really clear about like the things that I have to understand and deal with and the trauma I have to go through on a daily basis, knowing that it's going to be very difficult for me to get a lot of things done in my life and even be accepted in society in any kind of way. And then as I marry a Black woman, I have to understand that she has not as equal as even more issues of being married to a Black man in these kind of scenarios and having to deal with the ups and downs and the barriers and the consciousness that comes around that. And I think people think that we are like perfect people when we come into like certain societal norms, and we're not. We have to deal with things. Like, we still got to deal with ourselves walking in totally white rooms, improving ourselves. We still have to deal with things like the first thing that people ask us is, what school did we go to? Where do we work at? Like, where do we live?
How many kids do you have?
Yeah.
You might even have no kids.
Yeah.
But because you're Black, they just assume that you got a bunch of kids and that you're not married.
Yeah.
At least that's just my perspective.
Yeah.
I honestly feel that, like, of course I jumped in on when Carl was talking and he was like,
that's good.
asking something. And I'm like, what friend is asking you that? They are not your friend. Because I honestly believe that when things like this sort of happen, like the shootings and things like that, it shocks white folks to their core. Like, at least folks it's been hard to shake them, and they're like, ooh, this is really bad.
Yeah.
But what they internalize is, man, that could have been my son. Man, that could have been my daughter. What they don't internalize is the fact that this is just a person still.
Yeah.
They never give people of color, and specifically Black folks, because there's also that other thing where like white folks don't like to call out Blackness. They just like to say people of color when they're actually talking about Black people. You can say Black people or African American people, how they identify. But the other part is that, like, in my specific circles of like folks who I now consider probably like associates and stuff like that, they offer this false sense of humanity. We're all one. We're great. I love you. We come from the same. If we were to cut our arms open, we both bleed the same. And that's that, like, they're trying to paint this picture of like, hey, we're in this together. We're all one. But when something like this occurs, all of a sudden we get really polarized, and we start asking questions like, well, I need more information. I can't make any judgments about this particular human life, even though we just bled the same. I can't make any judgments about this human life. I need more details. Oh, I need to know what was happening over here. And I feel like what Carl was, what you were just saying, that like, you don't need to have us in slavery because the systems that still have you second guessing our humanity is still in place.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't need to be no slave. Like, the fact is, you could treat us so poorly because they were like systematically taught that we are not human. We were subhuman. Yeah. And so the idea that you can march on the street and call pro-life when you're really pro-birth, because all you care about is whether or not we kill life, but you don't care about the babies and the people that you're killing in the street as people of color, lets me know, because you question our humanity all the time, lets me know that it, it's, you put a false sense of humanity on us. Yeah. Like, because that's the stuff that feels good, right? That's the stuff that we can say, hey, we brothers from another mother, and that's the stuff that we encounter all the time. Yeah. Like, it feels like it's like a second hello for white folks to be like, oh, you're my brother in arms. Yeah. Okay, but when I'm up in arms and my arms are weak and I can't hold them because there's another shooting or there's another thing that happens, why are you in my inbox and why are you on my post telling me that I need to calm down and that I have no right to have rage, and if I'm upset, I don't have a biblical perspective about it. if I decide to speak up against racism, all of a sudden we're socialists. We too much in the world because now we only care about the world problems. But when you were waving your flag and telling me to eat apple, look, I'm about to really go there. When you were waving your flag and telling me that I better pray for my leader because that's the patriotic, not the godly thing to do. That's the patriotic thing to do.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, like you not about this world and this life too. Yeah. Me being about my world and my life looks a lot different. And to be honest, folks of color, Black folks, would be okay if white folks will leave us alone. Leave us alone. We build our own communities. We build it up and we say, hey, look, you don't see us as equals. You don't see us as human. You know, we're going to fully embrace our Blackness. We've been taught our whole lives that we aren't beautiful. We aren't this. We aren't that through the images and messages that we receive. Fine. Let's go build our own. Then white folks find a way to be upset that we build our own.
Yeah.
So when we say things like Black Lives Matter and we say things like, my Black is beautiful, that's somehow a threat to whiteness. That's somehow a threat to who you are. Because I decide to be like confident in who I am. I mean, again, if you left us alone, we trying to recover and we go get our own stuff, get our own businesses, we get our own things. And it's like, well, no, we don't like that either. We don't like that you have pride in that. We don't like that you're saying that because that's, we don't even like that when you say things like being anti-white, and again, it isn't anti-white like as a person, but the systems in power that don't actually serve anybody. I feel like because white folks in particular have also been so reduced to just being white that they don't even understand how like they should be grieving the disconnection to who they are too. When you embrace just whiteness, all you know is what American pie, like apple pie and flags and hot dogs. Like there's such a disconnect for you too. There's more to you than that. If you were to do ancestry and you see all these different places where you're from and all this heritage and culture, like I think that it's a disservice to you too.
I mean, they definitely talk about like white people don't believe that we have culture, right? Because white is normal and everything else is other. And like that's how white people see the world. And that's how you guys have to navigate a world. And the place that you have to fill in it is, I was listening to a guy at a thing that talked about like the day he was born, he was deviant from the norm because he was born into whiteness and that's what controls all things. And like what that is to navigate a space that's not made for you and for power that's not made for you and systems that are set up to disenfranchise you. And I think, again, like white people see it as an event and Black people see it as like a totally different way to exist. And I think, I want people to understand that. And some of the things that I have heard you guys say, I've heard Terrence say, I've heard other people that are my friends say, I'm just like, I had no idea what it was like to walk through life in a space that's not made for you because it's not my reality. And I think that is where empathy begins, is when we can listen and just go, wow, I had no idea. And I just, I think about like when things like this happen. I mean, you guys let me take care of Keegan when he was little, and like I still that little boy's got my heart, even though I haven't seen him for a long time. And like,
I'm quarantined with you right now.
We'll trade because my little son is on my last nerve too. But I mean, when I look at Abraham, I go, he's gonna be fine, right? And there are times that I'm afraid when I look at these young Black men that are just being killed, and like I I'm afraid for you guys. I'm afraid for Keegan. I'm afraid for what life is going to be in the future for them. And I honestly never would have thought about that until a mom shared her heart with me, you know, and like, I guess that's kind of, I would just love to hear, like, how is life different for you than it is for people that have never walked in your shoes? And I, at the same time, I don't want to demand of you that you be transparent past where you want to be, because I can't ask you to, you know what I mean? Like, that's not fair for me to make you share stuff that you don't want to share, but I don't know, just to open that up.
You know, we know.
Well, for people who are going to be watching this and seeing this.
Oh, you were like super professional.
Yeah, so it's about for people to just learn. I don't think it's something that you can just learn.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to experience it through empathy, like you said. Like, there's no way that somebody's going to be able to live in the amount of rejection and suffering that we do and not be depressed on a daily basis. There's nobody who's going to be able to live in the trauma and say, oh yeah, my mom beat up my dad all the time and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that too. But the reason that those things happened was because of where your dad chose those things. Some people's dad didn't choose those things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my dad, if somebody said my dad had to rob a liquor store, like, had to. Not that it was in survival of his family. He wasn't trying to rob a liquor store because he just wanted money. He wanted to be able to. We got men who spent life in prison or still spending life in prison over a loaf of bread, over the basic necessity. I've never seen a white person go to jail for a loaf of bread. Like, and that's the reality, is that the system is directly catered to one type of people. And if we think that just because they arrested at McMichael's that we're going to get, that's justice, that's a false justice.
Oh yeah, we learned real quick.
We know that justice is not done until, I'm just going to be able to say it, until the capital punishment goes through and the judge sentences them to life in prison. That's when justice is done. Justice is done when God says that we're going to get justice, not when the government says or communities say. Because what I think people are seeing is not abnormal, but is normal, and they're able to respond. Like me and Melanie were talking about that. Like, we're seeing pastors and people who've never responded, and now they have everything else is cleared out. So now they're able to respond. And what we're seeing is, like, now that is the problem that we've seen over time, is that people haven't responded.
Yeah.
Like, that is the thing. Like, people have not responded to the things that they heard. Like, somebody just reached out to me saying, hey man, you are a great role model. We love what you do in the community. You should foster children. Like, they're expecting me to respond. As a black man who worries about his kids, they're like, man, if I brought a foster kid into this situation, I will worry even more, because my wife knows that I worry about people because of the situation and circumstance they're in. I don't worry about them because they're based on their color. I practice radical generosity, and the radical generosity means I give of everything. And so it's sometimes, like, I want people to understand your experiences don't put you in a place to practice radical generosities. If you have nothing to give and you give something, it's radical. And I think that's the one place that I always find myself in, is like, people are always so thankful to me, like, oh man, thank you, Carl, for having this conversation. Thank you for talking. That's generosity on my part. That's a position, like, you were seeing the gift of giving from the Lord for me to have these conversations. It is not something that's inside of me that says, I want to speak to every white person and make sure they know racism is wrong. Listen, no, it is the grace from God.
I say that actually is. Some folks feel called to that ministry, and it is a ministry. Because God has graced them to be able to do that work. That is not everybody's work.
No, it's not. It's not.
It is not.
And so
it is taxing.
And to think, and for us to be in this type of society, it's just like somebody being called to human trafficking, It's just like somebody being called to homelessness. It's just somebody being called to children's ministry. Like, we have people that are called to bridging the gap, but there is a time and space where that's not enough. That is not enough. How many times we failed at our callings because it's just not enough. It's just not.
Yeah.
Like, as a pastor, it's not enough that I just pastor, you know, and there's much more that I have to do. And so for people who live in these spaces where that's just enough, it is actually a slap in the face to everyone around them that's really working hard to bridge and to stand in the gap and to really say, hey, now you can respond. Well, we're thankful that you responded. Okay, thank you that you had this opportunity to respond, but it's kind of still a slap in the face that you're choosing this time to respond. You didn't choose the time to respond when you had that African-American young boy right next to you in your neighborhood and he got shot, or the cops pulled him over and shot him. Now you want to respond to a young man who is 2,000 miles away, who is not in your prayer view, and you think this is the perfect time to respond. No, it's not. That's not a time of grace to me. It's more of an opportunity of influence. And so I want people to know, like, you cannot capitalize off of Black people's pain. That's what capitalism is doing. We're a commodity more than people. And so they look at us as a commodity. We're great athletes. We're great singers. and that's the thing that happens. And I think as people want to know our experience of who we are, to stop looking at us as a commodity and start looking at it like we're human. And that's the place that, I mean, they'll say, oh, I love his curly hair. Oh, Keegan is so cute. What makes him more cute than a white kid with the curly hair? Like, what makes him more cute? Because he's a brown baby? Like, I really struggle with that. Cute. Yeah, he is cute. Okay.
He's just beautiful. That's the problem right there.
And then so if people want to walk in the experience, to walk in the experience, they need to understand, they need to unlearn the things that they think should happen in a relationship. One of our team members, he is so clear in this. And he's a white guy. They adopted some African-American children. We were having a small group, and he said something to us that was really clear that made me say, oh my goodness, this is why he's the perfect dad for them. He said, I wish people would stop talking around the issue and just listen. And that's where he was at. He said, I just want to listen to see where I can be. I don't want to listen so that I can get my point across.
Yeah.
People are always listening so they can say their next point. He said, no, that's not where I want to be. I want to listen to listen. Yeah. And I think that was a very powerful realization to me that there are people out there that want to listen. And they don't want to listen to benefit themselves. They want to listen to listen. And when we get to that point, that's a point of maturity in this kind of conversation. Because the first thing that we all want to do is prove ourselves right. Like, the Black person wants to prove his point, the white person wants to prove their point. If you can sit down, my advice to all white people, if you really want to know about race, listen. Yeah. My parents taught me that at a very young age. You want to learn about a culture, you want to learn about a people, don't talk, listen. Listen to him. That's what my dad always says. He says, just listen. And you can ask my wife. He listens to a lot of stuff. And so he taught me when I was working in a Jewish grocery store. And I said, Dad, I don't know what a Sephardic and a Hasidic Jew is. He said, just listen. You ask them a question and just listen. Just be around them, be among them, and just listen. And that was at a young age. He taught me that. And so sometimes that's where we find a way to bridge, is not talking. It's not giving an answer. It's listening. And that's where the whole thing comes from. We know when somebody's actively listening to us, or they can't wait to chew at the bit to say their point.
So when a white person is not really listening, right? They're waiting to say the next thing. Can you talk about why it is an act of generosity for you to be real and vulnerable about your life, and what it's like in Facebook world when you put something out there and a white person comes back with a counterpoint, like why is that a different experience for you than for the white person who's trying to have a Facebook argument? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that white people grasp that what we're saying to you when we say some of the things, like, why can't we just not talk about race? Why can't we all just be Jesus people and not people? Why do we have to worry about color? Why do we all eat, right? Like, we come at you with these answers that sound really philosophically whatever. But I would love to hear when a white person says this, what you're actually saying about me is this. Because I don't think that a lot of white people grasp what we're saying to you and what we're asking of you in a lot of these spaces. And why I think that a lot of times, like, white people make Black people really angry. And a lot of times they don't know why. And it wasn't until I really, like, fully grasped what I had even said to you that I felt so bad. Like, I mean, like, in the times that you guys have been super generous with me with really stupid questions, like, I've come back and gone, oh my gosh, I said that because I was so ignorant of your perspective on things. Does my question make sense?
Yeah, I would say, like, the first level, I didn't get a chance to answer the other question, but
oh, okay, you go. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
We'll circle back to it. Because I was like, oh, I was formulating, percolating all over here. Like, when Carol was like, yes.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I honestly think that the most dismissive thing that white folks typically do in general conversations is that they, again, going back to humanity, right? Like, I live my life as a Black woman. Yes, I am all these other things, but if you want to have an authentic conversation with me, please do not say to me, oh, this isn't about race. Mm-hmm. Oh, let's talk about this, but let's not talk about race. Because what you're asking me to do is to compartmentalize myself in this conversation with you to appease the areas which you're not comfortable talking about. Mm-hmm. Like, if I am addressing a racialized situation, stop telling me to stop talking about race. Mm-hmm. Like, if I'm addressing something from my perspective, and especially like situations that we address on Facebook, it's going to be seen through the lens of all of who I am. Mm-hmm. So I think the beginner frustration is that oftentimes when you're in conversations with white folks, other folks who just don't get it, they always say, well, if it wasn't about that, and let's separate this out, and let's not talk about this piece, and so I think if they understood, like, if you come into a conversation with me, we're talking about a racialized situation, we're going to talk about race. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to not talk about race, and I'm not going to not talk about it from my perspective. You also can have a perspective in this, and we also can equally listen to one another about what that perspective is. There may be holes in my perspective as far as, like, I'm going to come like from what I think and what I believe. There might be holes in your perspective based on what you think and what you believe, based on the systems that you haven't had to navigate your entire life too. Mm-hmm. And so, you about to come in? Don't do it.
Yes, and I think the platform. No, I think the platform that people use on Facebook is incorrect. They think they have the right and the ability to tell me on my page what I should be thinking and what I should be doing. Yeah. That is not, so that's Carl's timeline. Right. That's not everybody's timeline.
Right. Well, the other thing too is I also get a little puzzled, especially with colleagues, associates, or people who we run into in other spheres, who attempt to have a racialized conversation around justice or equity in an online format. Yeah. I've never sat down with you to have this conversation with you face to face. Why are you trying to have a race conversation with me online? First of all, I will drag you, and then I'm gonna open up the comments and let my other friends drag you. I mean, let's just be real, like, because sometimes that is what is necessary. Like, when you ask a person of color about a racialized situation, don't ever think as a white person that it's not going to be personal. it's going to always be personal.
Yeah.
It's going to always be personal. And when you meet somebody for the first time, do you say, hey, are you, do you go into deep questions and deep rooted questions, or were you abused as a child? And like you don't do that.
Right.
You don't do that. So why can't white folks understand that the same level of care and concern that you give around topics that you do understand, that are heartfelt, is the same way that folks of color feel about race conversations, racialized conversations, conversations that lead to systems of oppression. Those are always going to feel and be personal.
Right.
Don't come at me on no timeline. Carl better than me. I will drag you.
No, I think
on this timeline.
But I also think it's personal. Like if I post something and you respond, it's personal to you. It's not personal to me. If I'm just posting an article about somebody that got shot, you're telling me that I'm being over emotional and I'm taking.
That does mean it's personal to you.
But no, it's not personal. I'm not. When we talk about race, when we talk about systems of oppression, I'm not taking it personal. Grief, I take personal. When somebody is shot and I have to have those conversations in my home, I take those things personal. But if I'm posting something on Facebook, on my timeline, it's not a deeply personal issue with me. It's not that, you don't post on Facebook.
Yeah, but when I do, honey.
It's personal.
When I do.
But if somebody responds, they're taking it personal. Which I just can't really fathom. Like if I post an article about something and they take it so personal and they get so emotional and they still get so tied into their thoughts and they think they have to respond to me, that's where I think is asinine.
Their baggage.
Yeah, why are you even bringing that personal stuff to me? Mm-hmm. And even if I did have conversations with you offline, you know exactly where I stand.
I feel like the other thing too, though, kind of circling back to what I was gonna say as I was percolating over here about your question about helping folks understand the ways in which we walk through life and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if I'm honest with you, I'm not fully sure if I guess I struggle or I'm challenged with the fact that white folks feel like they need more information to feel something. Mm-hmm. I need more information. I need all these personal touches in order for it to become real for me. Mm-hmm. And maybe that is a product of privilege that I will never understand because I'm not a white person. But I believe that even for white folks to radically unpack why they need personal touches is a part of the work, right? Mm-hmm. Why do I have to remind you that this could happen to you, or this could be your son, or this, and even those kind of statements? No, it couldn't be your son. It wouldn't be your son. Mm-hmm. And so that's even a false sense of trying to, false connection there too, because it probably will never be your son. Probably won't just be stopped going into his, into his place and be seen as somebody that's breaking in or whatever, So it actually won't be. And so I feel like there's a lot of facts and knowledge that is out there that doesn't come at the cost of the labor of other folks of color, that white folks, I feel like, just don't tap into,
Right.
There's information out there. There's a lot of facts out there. The same, but it really is about I don't have the privilege to not know that history.
Yeah.
Day one, I've been conditioned and taught in so many ways the way that I need to navigate this world. Some by choice, some by here's your limitation, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. I didn't need a list. No one had to give me facts of the information. I just kind of learned it as I went on. But we don't have the privilege of not knowing that history, but that history is accessible to all.
Right.
I think white folks, in my experience, it might feel like it's easier to access it from people, but the information is out there just the same way I got it.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm being taxed for my story, and I'm being taxed for you to understand what for, again, it's almost like an appeal. Like, I'm appealing to you that I'm human. I'm appealing to you that, that I'm a good person. I'm appealing to you in so many ways, even at the expense of myself, to prove I am something and worthy of life and worthy of breath, that you would listen and that you would take me seriously, and that you wouldn't just consider me emotional, and that you wouldn't just consider me a person that's trying to bring up old stuff like slavery, and because you would consider me like valuable and worthy. And so I feel like oftentimes it isn't that people are at different stages. Like, I do whole workshops on this. People are at different stages. And I feel like the same way that folks of color have to work on their own identity development faster than white folks, because we just don't have the privilege of not knowing that we Black, like when we walk out in the world, because there's unwritten rules that we got to follow. And I feel like there are folks who just don't know the facts and can get the facts, but they need to figure out better ways to access that. Like, and then there's also folks who find themselves kind of in between. They get like, I know the facts, now I don't know what to do with it. Like, what do I do with all that I know? And so they get like what I call like liberal paralysis. Like, I'm too scared to ask my friends of color to help me with this, because then it feels like I'm taxing them. But I also don't want to navigate this world and just be ignorant. Okay, well then I'm just not going to say anything. Well, those are silent supporters. They are no good to me. Like, you're no good to me if you're not going to be on the front lines with me. And so I feel like it's a little bit of this, finding folks who have the grace, finding folks who want to and are willing to have difficult conversations, call out the fragility in the room when you need to, and figure out ways in which you can, like, I don't know, almost look at it like a carbon footprint or something. Like, how can you reduce your harm to other folks around you? Right. Like, how can you, what's the most that you can do on your own to be equipped to have these conversations, to be equipped to have conversations with other folks who maybe are in places where you were years ago. Like, now I'm in the liberal paralysis area, but at least I know stuff. This person don't know me. Maybe I should go back and teach them some stuff, because I know stuff. And then it becomes like my labor. Nobody else, it reduces the harm for other folks who don't have to teach them. And like, I'm making my own connections that are outside of the ways that I've been taught to use the system to actually, like, join arms with other folks who are looking for liberation. Like, until we all free, nobody's free. You know what I mean? Kind of mindset. So I feel like I said a lot, but maybe that is I said a lot. Yeah. But I definitely think that would be a starting point. I don't think all white folks are bad and whatever. I honestly think that they're stuck in their own identity traps and not knowing who they are. So they're trying to connect to something, and they do harm. And then you also need folks who are like, yeah, I'm white, I'm gonna do some harm in here. I know it. I'm holding myself accountable, and I'm asking you to do the same. And it's okay for you to do so, because as long as we have areas in our life where we're privileged, we always need to be checked. I'm always need to be checked about my privileges. Other folks don't always need to be checked about their privileges. And so yeah, I did say a lot. I think I concluded though, whatever I was trying to say.
You went through exactly what I'm talking about, right? So you've got these people that start, when we start out as white people, it's really important for white people that the justice system makes sense, right? If the justice system doesn't work, if you can't trust police, if Black people are just getting shot for being Black, like, if that's really a thing, like, my whole world goes, right? And so you get these like super fragile white people that will fight you tooth and nail for every ounce. And kind of when you started talking about like why do I have to tell you about my story for you to believe the thousands of stories that are out there? Mm-hmm. And I think that for white people, it's because if I believe you, then my world isn't what I thought my world was, right?
Self-preservation.
Right. And so you get, and that's not fair. Like, that's not okay.
Right. But that's the
Right.
reason why, but to that point, it's the reason why the labor for folks of color to continue to do that is pointless. It's like there's not a whole lot of value and point in that, which is why we call it labor, because it's, you know, your ability to accept new information that is potentially true and shatters everything that you knew. We have our moments of awakening too in our own identity pathway. Those moments happen earlier when the first moment we realize we're Black. Mm-hmm. I was just playing with my childhood friend. We were playing with Barbies, and I thought everything was okay. I didn't understand why her mom came and grabbed her and pulled her away and said, "We don't play with those people." I'm like, well, Mom, what's wrong with me? Like, what do you mean? What do you mean those people? My moment of awakening in a racialized situation happens as early as 3 and 4 and 5 years old. Yeah. The moment for white folks and their awakening and realizing they're white and they might, their ancestors or they might be at the hands of harming other people don't happen until really late.
Yeah, until they enter college.
Really late. And the idea, not the idea, but a part of the process is to go through the guilty phase too. Like, I've been messing some folks up. Mm-hmm. I've been saying some things that's been crazy. Oh my goodness. And then you get in that moment where you're like, now I don't know what to do. The world done shattered. I'm a terrible person. What should I do? Cry to all your friends that you do know who still love you. Like, I'm so sorry. You know, all that is a part of the process, right? Like, that's a part of it too. Where what needs to happen is like, what's after that? After you feel guilty, all that ammunition, all that energy to feel guilty, let's activate it. Let's do something with it. Like, if you could help other folks reduce their harm to communities of color by listening to their stories, by believing people, it's like,
no, don't even believe, trust.
Yeah.
Trust.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I cut you off on my rant.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So trust. So what was your next question, Brenna?
I was just kind of walking through what Mel had said, just that idea of like, you have kind of the toe in the water people that are just realizing, and then they're starting to shatter. And then I love where you're going with like, they're feeling guilty. I mean, I know I spent a lot of time, and I understand that that's labor for you as well. Like, you're the one who's mourning a person who looks like you dying, but I'm coming to you talking about like how sorry I am and wanting you to forgive me and all. And like, people continue to make it about themselves until we get past that. And then it's like, we want to help. And so you get to this space where like, you have like woke white people, right, who like come in and like take over when a Black person is talking, and they try to be the white savior, and they come in and they start to try and like, and that's exhausting, right? Because sometimes they're trying to school you on what it is to be Black, right? And then
you preaching in here now. That's a whole level. It's a part of that, but it's a part of the passage. It's a part of the pathway, and none of it is straight and narrow. You might go back, a situation might hit you and you realize like, oh God, I feel guilty all over again. Like, what am I doing wrong? Why is it still happening? Then you like move past that, and then you're like, then you're doing a good thing for a long time, and then you realize like, oh, am I doing a good thing because I want to feel good, or am I doing a good thing because it's the right thing to do? And again, I feel like if I could help white folks understand that, not in the same way, by no means am I saying that the system is disenfranchising white folks. That's not what I mean. But if white folks could also understand how we are all like trying to be like, the system is going and we're all playing a role, and you are being kind of puppeteered, or what's the word? Like, there's a puppeteer for you, like two.
You're being manipulated, yeah.
Yeah, you're being manipulated to uphold and sustain the system too. Yeah. If we can get you to wake up from that as well, I mean, And you realize
it can't get you to wake up until you stop benefiting from the system. And that's the issue. That's where white privilege comes in.
But it's some of them they can't go about it.
But they can. They can change, they can flip the table. So we see in this that there's a lot of people that benefit from the system.
Sure.
And no matter what. So the first people that don't benefit from the system is white women. They start to see that they're not benefiting from the system in a white male and matriarchal thing. They're like, oh man, I am not benefiting from this white male complex that's happening over here. So now you stop benefiting, like, oh, I'm seeing some other stuff that other people aren't benefiting from this kind of stuff. And so one of the issues is that people only see this, and me and Mel talk a lot about this when it hits their home.
Yeah.
This is the only way they see that they're not benefiting any longer from the system when it hits their home. And that's the one place that we all need to start. Like, I am under the clear direction from God that there is not going to be a mass induction of white people waking up to racism. There's going to be a remnant. There's going to be a remnant of people.
No mass amount.
No. So there's going to be a remnant. So I can hold up my integrity when it comes to the remnant.
Ooh.
You know, from the mass, I could say, I don't need your support. I don't need your help, because there's a remnant that I get help and support with, you know? And so, like, we have to be able to determine, like, I, as a Black missionary and Black pastor, I have to actually act Black. I have to tell them that I'm Black most of the time. I remember me and Melanie used to go to our district council, our last one, because everybody's wearing suits. And I say, sometimes people forget that we're even Black in the room. So guess what we wore? We wore dashikis. And we reminded them that we're Black too. When we get predominantly white-led churches, we'll wear dashikis, because we want to remind them that we're Black also. Not because I want to say, oh, I have all this Black power and pride. I want to remind you that there are Black people in the room who go to your church, who identify with who we are, and that you need to learn to support us, because there's people who you are preaching to every Sunday that identify in that manner. And I think that's a huge problem when we start talking about white people dealing with it. Like, they think they're okay because there's a Black family. You don't even know what the Black family is going through half the time that's in the church until something happens. Until something happens, and you're like, well, we're not prepared to deal with that.
It's a little too late.
Yeah, so we never wanted to get to that. We never got to know them anyway. They never came to this, and they never came to that. Why would we? Mm-hmm. Because we don't identify with anything that you're doing. And so I think that was one of the issues that I constantly have with church, even going to Black church, like and all kind of churches, is that we only cater to a certain person. And Rick Warren calls this Saddleback Sam. And like, if we don't look like this one type of person, then nobody is going to be generous to us or give us any radical generosity, because they don't feel like we're worth it. And that is the hardest place to be in. When you know you're in the room and you know you have immense for God, and everybody around you says you don't.
I do sort of wonder what, I guess I do understand it, but you know, I do sort of wonder what white folks believe is sort of, what are they getting out of this whole display of, you know, posting about the shooting and saying that they're sorry. I mean, I'm not asking you to answer for all white folks the same way that we can't be the answer for all Black folks, but I don't get it.
I mean, I think that white people want to help. I think when they get to the place where they've gotten past those first few things that we're talking about, or even like just in this space where it's like, this is wrong and I'm not okay that this happened, right? And I guess like what I'm seeing in Minnesota anyway is like, when we're outraged about something as Minnesota youth pastors, we run. Like, that's what we run against: sex trafficking, we run for muscular dystrophy, all those things, right? So like when there was a run for this guy, everybody did it and everybody posted about it. And my fear is that that's where they're going to end, right? Because this is it's a moment, it's an event, it's one thing that they're upset about. It's not a recognition of all the things.
Right.
And I think, I think like to kind of come back to where you had kind of left off, like that idea of as white people progress through like breaking through the wall of understanding and then empathy and then guilt and then like apologizing, then I have a lot of friends that are at the space where they're like, I believe this is happening, I believe it's wrong, and I have no idea what to do. And a lot of times when they speak up, it's not the right thing to do, or it doesn't change anything. And so like
you know why I'm laughing, right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I think, Carl, kind of what you were talking about, like that idea of having to be aware of the water that you're swimming in, the whiteness that is what you believe to be normal, and understanding that like it's totally different for other people, and then working to change what the water is so that everybody fits. And I would love, or if that's not what you should do, I would love to know what would be some good places to start. Because I think it seems, I know I have a friend that's like, he got really excited kind of, and he started to talk about stuff, and he started to kind of get vocal, and he had a person kind of come back at him with like, why do you think you're a white savior? Why are you coming around saying all this stuff? Why are you getting so vocal? And so like he heard you need to be quiet, but then he also heard silence is complicit. And like, I mean, like he wants to help, but he has no idea what to do. And
that could be just because where he was speaking at wasn't a space for him to do it.
Yeah,
but he might have another space that is appropriate for him to do it.
The first space that people need to start doing it is with their family.
Yeah.
They don't need to start speaking on Facebook. They don't need to start speaking in groups and holding meetups and talking about all kind of their whiteness. They need to talk to their family. Every single friend that I have that is white, and they talk about this journey, I said, go home and talk to your wife about it first. Mm-hmm. Before you go do anything that you think you should need to be doing, have you talked to your wife about that first? And then have you sat down with your kids and say, hey, this is how I feel about race. And this is what's been happening in my heart and in my life. And I think we have a friend named Steve, whose wife is actually is Indian, and they've never had these conversations before. They've always lived in like white areas, and he didn't even know how his kids actually like identify. And then so they started to say, oh, Dad, we identify that we're biracial. We don't identify as white. And then I was just joking with him. I said, you're the last white person in your family. and then he's like, Paul. He was like, oh my goodness. and so you start to think about that. You start to think about that, and he's okay with being the last white person in your family, but there's some people who are not.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say too, like, I laughed when you said that, like, oh, what you mean somebody started to speak up and nobody listened?
What is that like?
Okay, listen, wear it as a badge of honor. Welcome to the fight. Welcome to the fight. You are saying something that is difficult to hear. You are saying something that shatters people's world. You are saying something that goes against even what your parents and parents' have been taught all their lives. Join the fight anyways. Join it anyways. If someone comes at you and says like, hey, white savior complex, don't take it like, oh, they dismiss me. Check it. Am I in a position where I am trying to feel good about what I'm doing for me? Like, go down a list of what it means to be a white savior. Thank you that person came and wanted to do some checks and balances with me. Because that's how this is how movements run. Like, people who want to be accomplices and allies have checks and balances. I never want to be in support or fighting for something and realize that I'm the problem in the room that people are trying to fight. Yeah. Like, you never want that to be the case. Take it as a checks and balances. Am I doing that? Is there another sphere of folks that I should be having these conversations with and not necessarily taking up space here? Is my space one to hear? If it isn't one to hear, hey, I understand if this isn't the space for me. I am really interested in continuing in this fight. Is there another place I should be led to do this work? And be okay when folks want to keep sacred space. Be okay with folks.
I want to just go back on the space thing, because if we're talking to Christians,
and
we're talking to people, they don't have another space to go into. They have a space right where they're standing to have these conversations. They're courageous.
What do you mean?
Like they can't go find another space where they feel welcome to have these conversations. They need to have these.
But I'm sorry. Because you're asking. Let me make it clear what I mean about being in another space, because you just talked about different spaces, right? Like if a person came up to me and they're ready to, like if a white person came up to me and they're ready to have a full blown conversation about Ahmaud and some of the other shootings and things like that, and I'm like, no, you and me, we're not doing this right now. This isn't the space. I'm not ready to have this conversation with you. I mean space as far as like we're making the connection, we're going to have a conversation about it.
Okay.
I feel like it's okay for folks of color who are in the same room with those white folks in the Christian setting to be like, I don't feel like this is my conversation.
Yeah.
This needs to be a conversation with white folks, with other white folks, because I'm not going to be in this room and I don't want to do this labor.
Yeah, so when it was, we were looking at how are we going to respond to the shooting as a church. As me, as a pastor, as a Black pastor, I talked to Melanie and I was like, Melanie, I'm struggling on how to respond, on like what to say. She said, you don't have to respond. And like we tell people that all the time, Black people. Like, you don't have to respond. You have the actually opportunity, like everybody else, to not respond to anything.
Yeah.
Because once you respond, you have to deal with the responses. You're like responsible for the responses that happen. And so I said, I had to say, you know what? I need to say something to our core group of people at our church and tell them why we're going to respond and how we're going to respond and what this means. Because usually when I post stuff on Facebook, they probably have no clue. And some people, most of it, so we say our church is multicultural. Because we have Black, Latino, and white in our church and so many different people groups. But we have mostly whites mostly white people are always engaging. We've had these conversations personally with people, but we said we need to define some terms that they're going to be hearing a lot of throughout Facebook, throughout their life, throughout the news story. So we define racism and white supremacy. And we had to define those terms because when white people think of white supremacy, all they think about is neo-Nazis.
Mm-hmm. White sheets.
Yeah, and so that Ku Klux Klan, there's more hate groups. That's all they think about when it comes to white supremacy. And so we have to define what that means. And so once we define that means they can hold to that truth about what it really means to be living in this kind of power complex. And when they go to Faith City Church, they know the pastor is Black, and he's one that looks at a multicultural, multifaceted people, but he also says racism is wrong. And had to say, we're not anti-police, we're anti-racist. Mm-hmm. And so, and being able to find these terms with people. In Christianity, no, very few churches will even send something like that out. Mm-hmm. Like they very few churches will define the terms for their people to say, this is where we're looking at. This is where you could come and say, okay, oh man, I didn't know that this is what this conversation was about.
Right. I was going to say, I so agree with you, Carl. Like, I was sort of watching the different pastors and folks respond and post, and none of them called out racism. They talked about how bad it was. They talked about that it wasn't a good thing. They talked about how could this happen? This could be my son, da-da-da-da-da. But no one said this was an act of racism. This was an act of pure hatred. Like, no one would put words to the systems that people of color and Black people have been talking about all this time. I feel like what does that make it too real for you? But I say that to say that I so appreciated that Carl did that, because again, once we start using terms like that, people even in the like the church and body of believers all of a sudden think that we're talking about something outside of like a biblical perspective. Like I can't even say racism because now all of a sudden that there's no biblical ties to it. It has nothing to do with nothing. And it's just some socialist word that was made up. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's just like, how do you explain a joined experience from folks who've been oppressed? Like what term can I use to help you understand this? Because then it gets so cloudy and mystified, and I think white folks who want to do well and do something with it don't understand the full system in which they're engaging in. Yeah. If we want to keep having a conversation about police violence, like that's an entry point for folks for white folks who want to be mobilized right now. That's only an entry point to the larger system that we have to talk about. Like that's the facts and knowledge that you need. Yeah, if you want to be in a space and you want to start having conversations about it, that's great. But we need to put words to this, because what happens is as years go by, and I actually, one of Mama Joanne, she is an activist. She was the youngest activist that was on the Edmund Pettus Bridge during the Bloody Sunday. If y'all know anything about that. Mm-hmm. But she was the youngest one on the bridge. They were doing a peaceful walk with MLK where the police pretty much beat all of the protesters, peaceful protesters, to a pulp on the bridge. She was the youngest one there, and she came to our campus and said something. She said, ever so often, every 10 years or 12 years, people start to rename things. They start to rename and put different words to it. And while it's okay while it's okay for each generation to have a different thought and a name for something, you lose the history of what it is. So white folks who are watching this right now, believe that this is just police brutality. But they know nothing about Bloody Sunday. They know nothing about the history of of the police, the Ku Klux Klan. Like they can't make the connections and ties. So they end up coming into conversations, having this small bit and fighting over details over these small bits of conversations because they're not naming it like he did for our congregation. They're just saying, oh, this bad thing happened, and look at this, like this person, these two people who did this. So then you're able to demonize or say that they need the Lord instead of looking at the larger system at hand. Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about police, like sheriff, like there were no police but on plantations, and the police were designed to keep the slaves in line. So how we have this unjust system of police shooting black people, it's ingrained. Yeah, it's not something that if we need to, like, for anything to happen. I tell people America will never do it. We need to dismantle some things. We need a new constitution. We need to dismantle some things. Why? Because we the people are not the people.
I mean, they weren't even talking about us.
Yeah, and when we got people who are Latina in our congregation, they're being and they may represent as DACA and we may represent as African American. They're still getting racism against them. We got indigenous people who are in our congregation. They're feeling racism. We have to change the thought process. Like every indigenous person that I know, when I talk about the Constitution and systems, they're like, "Oh, that system wasn't created for us." They have a tribal system that supersedes the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, but it isn't respected as such.
Yeah, but it supersedes it.
It does.
Yeah, it supersedes it in their 3 square miles of land. Yeah,
but tribal law supersedes law of the land. Mm-hmm. Supersedes it. So there's no way that tribal law can be challenged in a U.S. court.
But it is, though.
Yeah.
And there's not one treaty that America has upheld that has ever been created.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. So that's why we need to get rid of things like the 13th Amendment. Yeah. That's why we need to re-examine the First Amendment. Like whose speech?
Yeah. I feel like that would be a really good step. Like that would be folks who are like, well, what do I do with this? To like have deeper conversations and have like, I mean, again, as they dive deeper into these conversations, it isn't to say that they aren't going to feel all those things all over again.
Yeah.
Like they're going to have to be like, you know, coached through the guilt again, coached through I'm so sorry's again, coached through even their own rage about why have we known that this has happened and why haven't we done anything about it? Like, what is wrong with this world kind of thing? And be coached through those phases too, the deeper they get into this knowledge. And then, I mean, I think it,
And I think African Americans, Black, we grow up understanding that the system is what is against us, not people. And our parents tell us that, and they teach us these things. And they say these are the systems, honey. The world doesn't love you, but Jesus does. You know, having all those type of conversations. And I don't think white people.
I mean, a whole different thing to us, huh?
Yeah, it means a whole different thing to us. And I think one of the things white people's never have to have that kind of conversation with their kids. That the system will never do it. The world will always hate you, Carl, because you're Black. You don't think you're gonna walk in a room and they're gonna love you automatically. Like, there's no way that people, you're gonna have to fight for everything that you get. You can ask my wife, I fight for everything. Like everything, I fight for every step that we take is a large step of fight. It's not, and we fight spiritually, physically, mentally, psychologically. We're fighting for the things that, so that my son doesn't have to fight. Right. But, and that's the one thing that we have always understood, that we're fighting against systems of this world. Listen, in South Africa, they created a new constitution when Nelson Mandela became president, and they had like the specific hearings called a reconciliation committee. And the reconciliation committee said, okay, we know you people have been atrocities. We're not even going to attempt to put you in jail, but we're going to give you the opportunity to actually ask for forgiveness for the things you've done, and then leave or stay and work through the process. I think like only 75% of them left and moved to Australia. The rest stayed there. But they still had this, like, white people felt very threatened for their life. I don't know why. In South Africa. And I know you've been to Swaziland, you've heard a lot of this kind of like super weird rhetoric around like feeling threatened. But the reconciliation happened. There was something that happened on a government system level. Democracy is corrupt everywhere in the world. It's even more corrupt. So we can't even start to trust in democracy. But what we can trust in is that they took a step to change a legally binding document for their country to stop. And they still do it today, though. They still classify people just like we classify people. Like, classification was their system of racism. And it was horrible. And it continues to be horrible. Like, biracial people are called colored. Black people are called black. White people are called white. And they classify them, and they give services to those people. Like, there's an indigenous group of people who came from Hopkins and worked with people, and they call them colored because they're biracial. And what they do is they don't get any kind of services. And like, it's corrupt. Democracy is corrupt. The president of South Africa owns the license to all the McDonald's in the whole country. It's corrupt. He's a Black person. It's corrupt. But what we're saying is the step that needs to be taken is people need to clearly speak. I love South Africa.
I am chuckling because I'm listening to all the stuff that you're saying over here. Like,
because we have
McDonald's. He owned the McDonald's. He corrupt. Oh my
God. Because what we really think is that when we're going back, that people are good because some good thing happened.
Right.
People are not good. They're going to take advantage to line their pockets.
Our heart is desperately wicked. One man can know it.
Yeah, it's desperately wicked. And to think that because there's a trial, that is going to be fair.
Right. Right.
Until we see people convicted, that's when justice and Ahmaud Arbery's family gets the financial justice and also the political justice that they deserve.
But is that justice? Justice
No.
is the fact that we don't have to make any more hashtags. Like nobody else has to. Their life isn't threatened just by living. That's justice.
Well, hold on.
There is no.
So there's this thing. So as Melanie is saying, justice in America means reparations. Loss. So we value a life in the situation, and we bring reparations to make it. But that's not justice. Well, justice is changing the law of the land so this never happens again.
Right. Justice is changing the system.
And you know what? Even myself, I need to come under that complete understanding. And just as Melanie was talking, that's not justice. Reparations is not justice. And so
I think it makes the statement as if there is no amount of money that you can send this mother is going to get that is going to fill the void that she's going to live with her entire life, that her son is gone. Right. There's nothing, and in the way that he is gone, like I really struggle with the fact that, like, while people believe that the spread of the video is what caused this to, like, things to move forward, like the family of this young man had been asking for the videotape for months. This mother had to watch her son die on the internet.
Yeah.
And the video is spread like wildfire, further traumatizing anybody who watched it. And for some people at higher cost than others, because some people just live this every single day, just to prove once again, oh, you know, I needed more details, I needed more facts. And now that I see a video of it, like, this must be real. Like, now I can get with this and I can post and say, I'm sorry and I can't believe that this happened and blah, 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 blah. And so that is not justice. And I think any folks who've ever been disenfranchised or marginalized in any manner or being systematically knows that justice doesn't come until a system is completely dismantled.
Yeah, but we know that the video was used by God for his glory, because the purpose of the video was to protect the McMichaels. The purpose of the video was not to protect Ahmaud Berry. The purpose of the video, the person who released it said, well, I want everybody to see the facts, that the McMichaels were right. And when people looked at it, well, that's not the facts. The facts that you're proving is wrong. And so he in no way thought, if he released the video, that it was going to prepare them to be a GBI FBI case. He thought it was going to be a clear-cut decision that they were being self-defended.
I heard the story and I didn't need a video.
Yeah. So I think it's another way of seeing, like, the justice system kind of used. Now we know in court, we don't know how admissible this is going to be. We don't know what kind of more evidence that they need. And, you know, they've always thrown these type of things out. So we're not expecting real justice to come from this video. Real awareness came from this video. It was real. Real awareness came from the video. It had nothing to do with me and other Black people that I talked to about this. We know that it's not justice until we see something happen to them.
Yeah, but I mean, y'all already know that. I feel like when we talk about,
we saw this with George Zimmerman. He got arrested, but nothing happened to him.
Yeah, I feel like, I feel like a part of it again is just really thinking about questioning, like, if I posted this, was I posting the sorries because I was looking for absolution to not feel bad for being a part of the system and getting advantages from the system that just murdered this young man, which could definitely be like white savior complex sort of stuff. Did I do it because I wanted to be seen a certain way or whatever, or did I post something because, you know, like all the levels of questions I feel like folks who want to do something should start really thinking about like what impacted you by this. Like, why were you impacted? Why was this the thing to kind of shake you and wake you up? And have folks start there, because I feel like, especially with this sort of generation, you know, people sort of like romanticize being woke, but they don't realize that once you actually are woke and actually walk in reconciliation, and you actually walking in arms in the way that God calls you to, when you do take up this fight, it's the most exhausting thing you'll ever do in your life.
Yeah.
Like, you really are woke. No sleep. Yeah. Like when you sleep is because you decided to turn off the disheartening things in your heart for a moment so you can have rest. Right. Not because you have rest, but because you're like, Lord, take this burden from me. I gotta like close my eyes, you know, kind of thing. But I feel like folks need to really like just ask themselves those questions. Like, what was it about this that caused me to really want to be engaged and kind of work from there and figure out and allow it to be hard. I feel like when people have said sorry to me, I've just said, okay. Mm-hmm. Cause don't look for me to say, oh, that's okay, because you're looking for absolution so you don't have to feel bad. Yeah. I'm not giving that to you. Okay.
I think 3 questions people should ask is, why does it matter now? Mm-hmm. What's it going to change about me? And how can I change because of it, you know? And those 3 questions will really, like, you really have to think about this. Nah. Okay. I'm smart. Because we need to know, why does it matter? Like, if you can't answer that question about, like, any kind of racism that's around you, why does it matter? And if you answer say, well, it doesn't matter, it's only because of da-da-da-da, then you're really not sold into this. And then said, why does it change? Why does it change in me? Like, what about you that you know you need to re-examine that you've been living in? What kind of light have you been living in the midst? Why does it change you?
I honestly feel like white folks might be a little bit more surprised if they actually start showing up authentically about the responses that they'll get.
Yeah.
Like, when you say like, oh, I probably called and was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And then, you know, or maybe even not that. It's just, you said like, you probably have said things and then now you realize you said them and you're like, oh, that was just like so silly. The things that keep you up at night when you're in the shower, you're like, oh my God, in the 7th grade. Like, whatever, that kind of stuff.
So I'm going to put this out there.
Hold on, babe. I'm like, let me put this out there. Let me put this out before I forget it. But I honestly do feel that folks in general, and when we talk about racialized situations, white folks would be very surprised the type of welcome and the type of responses that they would get if they would actually just authentically show up. Mm-hmm. Listen, for instance, white person, I don't know how to start or have this conversation. I know I want to have it, and I know I don't know what I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I know that I'm ready to stop running away from having these conversations.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think that goes a long way. Yeah. I don't know what I don't know, but I know that I'm ready to have these conversations. And in whatever ways that mean, you know, that might mean, yeah.
Yeah. So
Carl's,
I'm having an experience. I had an experience with somebody that was a police officer.
He wrote me a little note. He said, Mel, you didn't even want to do this. Now you're taking over. So I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, tell the truth.
I apologize. I said I did. I was like, I don't feel like doing that right now. Yeah. I was like, I don't feel like doing this. I really feel like this. You can do it. If you feel well enough as a Black man to talk about what's happening right now, I feel like it was his platform. I totally came in and took over because that's just me. And I apologize. I mean, I'm so sorry. I love you, okay?
Well, you can stay.
As a Black woman, I want to support you as a Black man.
So I have a relationship with a guy that goes to this white church, and he was a crime scene investigator. And when somebody would get shot in our neighborhood, I would extend myself out to the family or anybody that was involved, and I go out to the scene and I pray with the family after the scene has been cleaned up by the police. And he noticed I did that a couple of times, so it got word to him that I was doing that, and so I gave him my number to give the families. He said, "Hey, when families need somebody to pray or talk with, I really can't tell them you need to talk to this guy. Would you let me give you a number?" I said, "Yeah, sure. Here's my cell phone number. This is what they can say." Yeah. So that is super interesting to me. Then a couple of days ago when I post an article, he has my email, he has my phone number. He decided to post a whole bunch of rhetoric. And I was like, I don't got time to deal with this. So I deleted his comments. And so that's the same thing he did. So another thing that happened, he emailed me because he's part of this church's mission board. And he went to, so I thought in just the integrity of this, it was this guy is actually responding in a very emotional way that I need to tell the pastor because he's part of the mission board. And we need to figure out if I'm part of a mission that they need to continue to support. Because he's somebody that's in leadership, asking me to know about my ministry. This is my ministry. And so I called him and I told him, and he was like, yeah, he already called me and told me that you deleted some of his comments. And I said, the power and privilege that sits right there, where you got overly emotional about something and you ran and told the pastor, not the truth, because he told the pastor, oh yeah, I told him that we would meet. I literally put out a public service announcement on my Facebook page that said, do not argue with me about your ideologies, or message me so that we can meet. And then he messages me. He didn't message me first. And those are some of the things that happened. Is I challenged him and he didn't like the challenge. He got emotional about something. He started talking about some other shooting. That has nothing to do with me. I posted about the one thing, a Black man getting shot by a white man that's 1.5 miles away from my house, who I felt I need to lock my door when I heard about the shooting, and told my wife, hey, we need to be a little bit calm tonight and don't go outside because of that. So I felt that. So it has nothing to do with his caseload. And so I'm supposed to automatically read his white mind and know that every little emotion that's coming through himself for me to be acknowledged of, no, that's not who I am.
Right.
And that's a place that people often find themselves, is that they take it so personal. I have nothing to do with that. You didn't even reach out to me first and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this.
Right.
That's your communication level. But you took it in a place of power and saying, hey, this is where I need to speak. You need to stop doing what you're doing. And listen, I'm in another place of power, and I'm going to tell them that you're not doing what's right, And that right there, for me to be held up, I was like, well, we need to discuss whether you guys need to support us anymore. Because I don't need, he says, well, he doesn't speak for everyone, but he spoke to you already. Right. So he has the privilege of power, and this is not the first time this happened. This is not the first time this happened, and you know that. He's like, yeah, I know. So you want me to continue to be resilient through these things, and you want me to stay on your board, stay a part of your mission. But when the people that you have don't care about the mission, they care about themselves, self-preserving and getting emotional about things. And so that right there doesn't seem like I should even continue to accept support as an African-American pastor who's dealing with different issues in the city. And just because you're a cop doesn't mean that you get to tell me what I should be feeling right now. And that right there is the problem when we talk about race. Right. That somebody always thinks they should tell somebody how they should be feeling. Me and Melanie, in the beginning of our marriage, we said we cannot tell anybody how they should be feeling. She has the right to feel the way that she feels, and I have the right the way to feel I feel. And nobody can take that away from us.
But you did tell me not to go off on him on Facebook because I was ready, but he told me not to. So I was like, all right, I'm going to just feel what I feel to you face to face because I can't really say what I want to say.
Yeah.
But isn't that such a picture, though, of like, he felt like he could go off on your page, and like white people feel that all the time. Like, if you are challenging my worldview, I have the right to tell you that you're being divisive or whatever else I want to tell you. And I don't extend that right to you to go, somebody in my community was just shot and it's not right. And the idea that you could be punished for being real about suffering because it makes a person in power uncomfortable. I mean, like, that is what privilege is, right? And like, for all the white people that don't believe that they have privilege because, you know, they've had to work in their lives or whatever, like, I mean, the idea that you would get punished for speaking up against a way that you are suffering is crazy and completely, totally the experience of so many Black people in the world, right? Like, I mean, it's the day-to-day of it.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. We have families that are connected with us that want to listen, and because of that, there's people that say, I need to hear your voice. I've never even wanted to hear our voice, you know? And so there's a guy that was a mechanic, him and his wife, she works in St. Paul, and she was like appalled by the response and like reached out and said, I really need to understand from you, Carl. I need to hear from you. Because even at the church, that's all I spoke about was race. They would call me in to preach on race. You know, you heard the message, the unity and diversity. So my whole biblical, he's going to tell me I'm not biblical. I'm like, man, you can go back to the messages. Listen to these 4 messages about my biblical understanding about race. And so the thing that is so abnormal about it is that when these people, God gives glory. And I'm starting to understand that more and more. God gives the purpose of our worth is so that God gets the glory. It's not so that we feel really better about our situation. And, you know, I always used to hear people always say this, Black churches say this all the time. It doesn't matter who gets the credit, but God gets all the glory, you know? And it doesn't matter like what he said. What it did was highlight people who wanted to listen, who never had the opportunity to say, I want to listen right now. And they probably watch every single post that I do and never say anything because they're listening. And this person got emotional in this one part. And so I think that's one of the things that we have to understand, like our speaking out, God uses it. It may not be directly, but nothing goes to waste in the kingdom of God. And we need to understand speaking out, you never know who's listening, how that could change their life. You never know who's watching and how that can change the direction and thought process of who they are. Like they may have been raised in an all-white household and nobody's ever said anything about race to them. And you may be the first that speaks about race to them. I know Justin Fenton. He is so excited to talk to me and Melanie all the time, just like you are. And I remember we went to go preach at their church, and he purposely sat down with me and Melanie and asked some real questions, and we gave him some real answers. There were people around him asking dumb follow-up questions, but he was asking like the real questions. And his wife was like listening, and I said, Melanie, he took a real interest this time and actually was listening and asking real questions so he can actually, because he's a youth pastor.
I know. I usually check out during those lunches and dinners.
Yeah.
After church, I'm like, let me go get my meal because they're going to start talking about preaching and all this other stuff. But he was very genuinely, authentically showing up. Yeah. He kept saying, I don't know. I'm curious, or like, I don't know what I don't know, and willing to engage in the conversation so we can be like, listen, even what I tell you is just from our perspective. We're not the Black voice of life, or we're not the people of color voice of life. We can only tell you what we know. But his genuine an authentic interest in it, not just like not for his own gain.
Yeah.
It was like, I know if I don't hear this information or if I don't get clear, open perspective, I'm doing a disservice to people that I'm in real relationships with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's in my Inspire group right now, and actually he was giving y'all shout outs, like people. There's a guy that's kind of looking for urban stuff, and he's like, you gotta hang out with Carl, like you gotta get with Carl because he's amazing. And like so, like yeah. Your guys' generosity in those spaces, that willingness to be real, even though it is labor, right? It is it is generosity, and white people don't understand why, but it is like it's huge, and it changes people. And I guess like yeah, I mean that was part of the reason that I reached out to both of you, is just like you guys you know, Mel, you've called me on some stuff and it's been good. Like it's been like there's times where like I think like
I must be doing this like not even knowing.
No, it's good. Like it's like I don't know, a few months ago I posted something, or you and somebody else were going back on my timeline, and I said something to you and you were like, well, I don't speak for all Black people. And I was like, you know what? That's true. Like I totally I was treating you like the Black person that I know, you know? And like those times where like, I don't even know that I'm doing it, but that's vulnerable, right? Like that's a risk. Like a white person gets offended real easy and they can come back at you, or they can shut you down, you know? And yet like when you're willing to do those things, I grow and I learn. And I appreciate so much your guys' heart and just ability to really call the church higher and people higher. And you know, you guys have so much wisdom and so much like you see around the issue in all the circles. And trying to remember, Carl, you were just talking and there was something that I wanted to come back at. I'm sorry. You were talking about like this church kind of like they bring you in to have you talk about diversity, but then when you're real about your experience online, right? Like you get penalized, right? And I mean that's classic like tokenism, right? Like we want to have diversity, so we're going to put a Black person at the table.
I said something to him when they called him in. I said, you believe it? I was like, you do know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
I just want to like, I want to direct a question at that, I guess. Like people, white people understand or realize in the church, we're starting to see like we are segregated. It's not okay. We want to bring people of color in. And so we put a Black person at the table, or we bring in a Black speaker as a token. And we think that we've done our job, or we get really upset about Ahmaud Arbery and we go, I'm upset with that issue, that one situation, and I'm going to speak up this one time. And we don't see it in the context of all the things. And tokenism is almost more hurtful than if you just like stayed racist, right? So like how can we change the way that we do diversity and do it better in a way that's actually kind of, Mel, you were talking about like pretending that I care about your humanity, but not actually, you know, like how can I actually value your humanity? And what are some steps that people that care but don't understand can do, I guess?
I think a church can take 12 preaching points out of the year and give it to Black voices. And I told my white counterparts who are really listening in this time, I said, you guys should have more Black voices in your church until your people start seeing the Black people, they start hearing Jesus. And so that's the issue. Like people are like, oh, that was a good Black message, Pastor Carl. Now,
they said what?
No, this is.
They don't actually say it. They just speak it.
So that's a good message, Pastor Carl. Hey, what do I do now?
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you say that to your pastor every Sunday when he's preaching about you sinning and about forgiveness and adultery, and you just look racism and you took racism and put it in this far left off box and said, all right, God, I don't know what to do with this, so that can stay there until the black pastor comes in and I can ask him, what do I do with this? And I think the problem is that churches today have not put enough, especially in the Midwest, have not asked for forgiveness from their black counterparts, and have seen them and has not created some equity within their churches. Now, I'm not talking about Africans. I'm going to be very clear. I'm talking about Black Americans. I'm not talking about somebody from Nigeria. I'm not talking about somebody from Kenya or Liberia. I'm talking about African Americans who you not put on the stage, who you only put them on the stage to sing and to work in your youth group because they could deal with the urban kids. Or you barely put them in your youth group to deal with urban kids. You put them as assistants to the white youth pastor who you really want to have the power. Okay? Who you say that's going to be my next pastor. So
that's a whole word. Let me go and slide out. No.
Yeah. So you have not reiterated in yourself how you want to see black voices commemorated outside of Martin Luther King's birthday and Black History Month. And so that is the problem, is that your people don't think black people have enough Jesus to speak into your pulpit. You love gospel music. You love getting those fresh fades, and you wearing Jordans on Sunday, but you don't got a black person in sight. And so that's the problem, is that you like everything but black. And so, and that's the problem. You don't like the voice. You don't like the questions. You don't like the concern. You don't like the situations and circumstances that they have to deal with. Now, I say it like this: God said, I hear your brother's blood been spilled, and I'm crying out. You forgot that statement. And then what does the brother say? Oh, I'm not my brother's keeper. That's how the church has treated African Americans for the past 400 years.
I also think.
Go ahead.
No, I also think that the reason why there's a lot of tokenizations and calling people of color, specifically black people, to come in and do the race message or this particular special message, the reason why it becomes so elevated and highlighted as tokenization is, why are white folks waiting for people of color to do the heavy lifting in that topic? Half the time when black people talk, y'all don't listen to us anyways. Y'all got to wait for another white person to come back and say the same thing that we said to believe it anyways. So why send my husband in so he got to do all the hard, heavy labor? Half the people don't think that he's over exaggerating because he's black, and here he comes. He about to talk about slavery. I mean, these are topics like, if you don't need permission from the oppressed to elevate and uplift people who are disenfranchised.
Yeah.
Do it when nobody's watching you to pat you on the back and say you're a good boy.
Yeah.
Like, do it because it's the right thing to do at all times.
Yeah.
When you do it because it's the right thing to do at all times, folks of color and other folks who are in other different marginalized positions, like there's intersections to this that we ain't talking about here. You know what I mean?
Let's not even
like,
get to intersectionality.
No, I'm just saying, like, there's some
biblical.
Yeah, well, no, there's some intersections to this where, like, you know, folks who are marginalized folks and folks of color who have other pieces of themselves, like where they are differently abled or whatever this intersection is, will start to feel like they're a part of, you know, I feel like I'm being talked about and I feel like I'm being elevated. I feel a part of what this congregation is doing. I want to stay in this. Oh, I feel a part of this. I feel like they're elevating me, or I don't even have to be there on that Sunday and my voice is still heard at the table. Yeah, I would love to be a part of this. I actually want to be in the seat at the table. Like, you don't have to tokenize me. I want a seat at the table. I'm asking for a seat at the table. You give me a seat at the table, and I want to make sure that I'm not just there to be that voice, but you see me as an equal part. Like, I want to tell you that that the games we played at the youth event was whack.
Yeah.
Not because I'm black, but just because they was terrible.
Yeah.
You know, and my voice is equally good. It's not just when we get to the tough stuff about race and the inner city kids. All right, Melanie, what do you think? No. I'm an equal part at the table.
Right.
You don't have to elevate me. You can elevate me before I get there. Like, you're making room and space, and I feel like as white folks and young white folks who are doing like youth groups, you should see your groups as incomplete until everybody's at the table.
Mm-hmm.
If all of you all are older white men, somebody's missing. If all y'all are just older white folks, men and women, somebody's missing. Like, see it as being incomplete until you feel like everybody is at the table. And for those, like, we just don't have the right combination because we can't have 50 people at the table all trying to talk at the same time in this group, then I need to make sure it's my job to elevate the voices that aren't here.
Yeah.
That means that I have personal relationships with people who don't look like me to make sure that I'm still speaking up for them just as strong as I am the people who do look like me.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You'll never expand diversity. You can have diversity doesn't last long in church when you don't have inclusion.
Yeah.
Like, if you just counted me as a number in the seat, I'm gonna show up a couple times, but you ain't never said hi to me. You don't even want to connect with my family. Give it a while. I'm gonna be gone. You know, or I might find that one thing I have a connection to, but that's about it. You're not tapping into any of the gifts, talents, abilities that God has given me to actually uplift and build the church. Like, you're doing yourself a disservice by not having me do some other things that I'm capable of doing. But I won't be there long. If you want to keep people because they're valuable, not because I just want to look good and look like a multicultural church.
They're a commodity.
Yeah, you make space and room for them as if they're already in the seats and as if they're already serving with you. You talk about them as if they're already there. I don't care if your whole church is white. You need to uplift multicultural voices as if they're already there. Multicultural music as if people are already there. That way, when you do get the people there, it's not up to them to make the culture happen. It's already there.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, I fit in right here because they've been talking about me months ago. I visited one time and they were talking about me, and I visited again. They're talking about me again. This is great. I want to serve here.
But don't put posters of black families. You don't got no black families. Right. Listen, I be going to church and churches, they got posters and pictures of people who are black. I'll be looking for them. I'll be like, where y'all at? Oh, this was a mock photo. Oh, okay.
They're on stock photos of Blaze.
That is not. That's the way Melanie that you can have somebody visit, but they will not stay.
Yeah. Like we had a promo video, inviting people to church. There was this black girl named Brittany. You know, I got like 3 or 4 calls like, oh, where Brittany come from? I was like, who is Brittany? And they talked about a new social date. I said, oh, that's just a video, bro.
I told him not to do that. I mean, not like if they came and wouldn't see black people, but then they go like, well, where's Brittany? I really connect with her on that video.
Said Brittany doesn't live here.
Listen, but then that just tell you right there, it don't work either way. Yeah. Black or white, it don't work. Yeah. Stop doing it. Yeah. Stop.
Be authentic. And that's why I think what's happening, they're seeing in this time of COVID, we're seeing people do live videos, and authenticity is what keeps people. Mm-hmm. Like, people aren't going to stay there. Pastors are afraid that they're going to lose their churches because no longer are they authentic about who they are. And they know that stuff is going to be shut down, things are going to change, and they're going to go to places that people are authentic. That's like why me and Melanie have not tried to pre-record our services, because we want people to see who we really are and see.
So you hear my son in the background yelling, there he is.
Yep. And let them know we deal with the same stuff. That's authentic. And we change the time of our service. We try to spend 30 to 45 minutes for the whole thing, instead of trying to spend a whole hour trying to get people to connect. And so that's like authentic. Like, we're not trying to hold you hostage. for a live video, and then we're attracting people who are in the community who say, "Oh, he's being real about who he is. Who he is on that video is the same guy I see in the grocery store. He's not changing."
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that's one of the things that we're learning about community is that people are tired of the flim flam that they're seeing online. They're tired of it. They're tired of the great social media posts, but they want to be connected to a group of people and a community of people so that they can actually flourish. It doesn't matter what color they are, but they want you to talk about the real things.
So for white people to be authentic in a genuinely white church that's marketed to, has historically been, does everything for white people in a space where Black people will come in and feel totally out of culture, like how can we be, what does authenticity look like in that space?
Authenticity, if you want to be a multicultural church and you're all white, you need to have a different conversation with your church. And say, sometimes we do things to feel like we're actually being something else that we're not supposed to. Like, we meant to be a multicultural church, not because we desired it, because we were moving to a multicultural neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And we were reaching multicultural people. That's why we do it. Like, we know that the kids that go in our elementary school speak 100 different languages.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we're multicultural. Now, if I'm James White, and everybody in their school is white, and everybody in their community is white, and we're the first multicultural church in Eden Prairie. No, you're not. You're not supposed to be the first multicultural church. That is not who you're supposed to be. Be authentic to who you are. You can still talk about race. You can still talk about multiculturalism. You can still talk about ethnicity, but be real where you're at. Be like, hey, we know we don't have any Black people or white people that go to our church, but that's okay. We're still going to talk about race. We're still going to make it a big deal that what happened to Ahmaud is a tragedy. We're still going to say these things because it is not your job to create a church, you know? And that's one of the things that we have learned. We're not out here creating a multicultural church. We're out here reaching people who live in the neighborhood, and they happen to be people of different ethnicities.
Yeah, but I think the other part of it is too something that we talked about. Like, I think when we first, maybe we were like dating or something. As a person who was a person that goes, like, before we became pastors or before Carl became a pastor, I'm a person who goes to a church. If I can't see myself in leadership, I do not stay. Because I know I'm going to be, if I ever become in leadership, I'm the only, and that's a whole nother fight when it comes to like being in a Christian church and being the only. In an all-white church that has all white people and caters to all white people wanting a multicultural church, it's like, this is not like a magical field of dreams moment. You didn't build it. They ain't coming. Like, just let's just say that. Right. Like, you didn't build it for that. They're not gonna come. Like, it's not gonna just magically happen because you sent out a couple of flyers or whatever. And I think that's kind of the worst kind of flim flam, right? Like, where you try to say that you are, or that you're trying to work towards something, but nothing in your church wants to change. You don't want multicultural church. You want assimilation. You want people to come in from different colors and assimilate to what you do, right? So that it can appear like it's great. But y'all sing hymns, or you sing the same genre of songs that doesn't connect or relate to the people you want to bring in. The messages don't relate in a personal level to where folks really are if they're struggling in certain things because of socioeconomic class and like all the things that we know is the realistic pieces when it comes to having a multicultural church. If we're never going to talk about anything real, when there are real things that are happening to people, then, you know, look, we ain't build it, they ain't coming. But I think that if a church is having that conversation, or a congregation is having that conversation, then it's good. But like, it's going to be a little bit of shattering with that too, right? Like, you know, what is it going to take for us to have a church that looks like the kingdom of God? Are we willing to lose everything in order for us to have the kingdom of God?
Yeah.